What we're going to do now is we're ready for the second stage of the painting. So I've prepared this canvas first, so it's at its second stage. And it's just about where the first one was finished. I've got everything laid in but the purple that was here, but I've got my ratios established, I've got my banding established, I've got my large dark, and that's about all I wanted to do on that first time before it got too wet to go to the next stage. Now I'm ready to start the next stage, and that's going to get the colors are going to be a little closer but not finished yet. So it's the next layer, and I'm going to start with this mass, the tree mass first, and I'm going to try to find a transition of color, and I'm going to do that on the palette and touch it to the canvas and see if I've got the sense of the beauty that I'm looking for. So at this stage, I've mixed up a series of greens and blues that'll work for this back mass. And I'm going to add a little liquid to them, and they can be different liquids. This is a copal painting medium. You don't need much of it, so I'm going to pour it right onto the canvas, onto the palette. And we make our own here as well. It's got a lavender base instead of the petroleum base, and you can see it's a little prettier. It's a nice amber. And so I'm going to put that down and get a clean brush, and I'm going to take a knife and I'm going to touch these colors in to see if they do the job I want them to do. And so I'm looking at a color that's going to we're looking for something that's pretty. So I'm going to go from the ultramarine through a little bit of that violet and see if I can get into this phthalo down here. And I'm pretty happy with that. So I'll take a little bit of that paint and put it into each of these piles, a little bit of that medium, and put it into each of these piles. Not a lot, just like as much as will stick to my knife. And I'll start at the toppest edge, at the highest edge. And again, the shape of that hill is in this direction. So I'm going to go against that edge shape, and I want you to see how I'm holding that brush. I'm pushing it into that surface with almost a sweeping motion so that I can let some of that green come through, and I'm still able to come back and fill in other areas where I want it more densely covered. And I'm going to shape it in such a way that it's a little more interesting than just that flat edge. So I'm going to block that in, and I'm starting to be more deliberate now, because I've got a good base, and now I'm trying to make pretty. And I'm literally going to try to make pretty. And so I'm going to shift now from one color to the other, and I want each of my brush strokes to stand out a little more distinctly. Whereas in the first stage, I'm blocking in color, so I'm scrubbing it in so you don't see distinct brush strokes. Here I'm trying to let each of these color shifts be a little more obvious. And the idea is that I'm going to start to make what was a simple block of color shimmer a little bit more, and I'm going to shift from one color to another so that I have a sense of that beauty. And that green looks pretty. It's looking really nice already. It's amazing what another layer of paint will do. And now I'm going to put that green back on top, and I'm going to try to I'm not going to move much. I'm not going to move this line. I'm just going to try to go against it so we soften it up and keep the brush strokes sort of distinct. And it's interesting how as I push it in more, what was a pretty stroke then becomes ugly. So I have to make certain that I don't overwork this. I ran out of paint a little bit. And I'm not worried about keeping that mass. I'm going to refresh that big dark mass. Right now I'm just looking to make certain that I have a real attractive, soft diminishment of color here. And while the first time through that rough surface was giving me a problem, I couldn't get enough paint on, the second time through that rough surface is softer, but it's letting these colors soften up nicely. These transitions are much more attractive with that on there. It's a little harder for me to speak when I'm looking this hard. That sounds strange, but usually if I'm working fast, I can kind of talk, But right now I'm trying to really shift into a visual mode, and I want to make certain that what I'm doing is attractive, so I'm looking a little harder than I normally would at the surface. I'm not looking at what I'm painting, I'm looking where I've painted. Before I move on, I'll probably block in a little bit of the color for the water, just so I have a sense of what's happening there. So I'm going to take a little more medium now. And the white and a touch of my watercolor, which is going to be orange. I'm going to block this in. And again, the edge, that far bank is a horizontal direction, so I'm going to make certain I'm putting that water in vertically. And I think I can get a little more snazzy than that. And I want it to be bright. And I'm going to make certain that it references the sky, so I'm going to, without diluting it, I'm going to put in a little bit of the sky color here. So I'm going to know to lighten this up just a bit. I'm still going against the grain of that first stroke, but I'm tempted to try one or two horizontal strokes to see if I can't break up, use that first layer to help break up in some of that paint. So it's interesting. And I want you to notice how I'm changing the angle of my brush from this or this to a much more, almost a dry brush. I'm almost horizontal to the surface. That brush is not sticking out at all. So I'm letting the paint be pulled off. And I'm going to pull that light down a little bit more and clean up these edges a little bit. So I'm going to have this be a more interesting and exciting edge. And as it's going back in distance, I'm going to let the mountain and the water kind of join together. So that means making that water green or the mountain red. And I think I'm going to kind of let it happen this way. Just soften those edges a little bit so we're not certain where one ends and where the other begins. And I'm still seeing a little abruptness here, but that, for the first coat, that's okay. I'll go over this one more time when it dries. But I want to see which way I'm going to go. So I'll probably play with the sky next. So I'm going to drop that in. Now this is a unique color. This is an azo burnt orange. And the only place I've found it is Brooklyn paint maker by the name of Robert Doak, D-O-A-K. And I'm sure you can find him on the internet. If not, you can call us at the studio and we'll be glad to give you his name. That's a little strong, isn't it? And you notice I'm using I'm still using only drops of medium. I'm not really making it very fluid because I want these brush strokes to stand out more and be more distinct. So I'm able to lay some color down.